The stars looked different when you were dying. Captain Zexthara pressed her crystalline hand against the cracked viewport of the Harmony's edge and watched the cold light bend through the fractures in the transparent metal. Her ship was falling apart around her, atmosphere bleeding into space through dozens of hull breaches, and the emergency lights cast everything in a sick red glow that reminded her of blood. Behind her, the bridge crew worked frantically at damaged consoles. Sparks flew from overloaded circuits while the artificial gravity fluctuated, making everyone stumble and grab for support. The beautiful flowing lines of Altarian architecture looked broken now, twisted metal and shattered crystal that spoke of violence beyond anything her peaceful people had ever imagined. "Captain, we're losing life support on decks 4 through 7, reported her tactical officer, a young Altarian named Kexman whose normally perfect features were marred by cuts from flying debris. "The bio-regeneration systems can't keep up with the damage." Zexthara nodded without turning from the viewport. Out there in the darkness, she could still see the aftermath of the battle that had destroyed her task force. Debris clouds marked where the diplomatic vessels from 3 different species had tried to make their final stand. The Viridian Republic's ships had been fast and graceful, their pilots skilled beyond measure, but speed meant nothing when the enemy could simply absorb your weapon's fire and keep coming. The scholarly vessels of the Nexus Collective had deployed their most advanced defensive technologies, shields that could deflect stellar radiation and energy barriers that had protected their worlds for 1,000 years. None of it had mattered. The Devourers consumed everything. She had watched through her ship's sensors as the bio-creatures swarmed over the Viridian flagship, their living hulls pulsing with absorbed energy while they converted the elegant vessels hull into more of themselves. The screams on the communication channels had lasted for 3 minutes before cutting to static. Captain Velshin had been a friend, a warrior poet who wrote beautiful songs about the dance of starlight on his homeworld's rings. Now he was gone, absorbed into the collective hunger that drove the enemy across the galaxy. "Ma'am, incoming transmission." "From the Galactic Council," called her communications officer. The insectoid Dr. Clichter looked up from his console, his compound eyes reflecting the emergency lighting in tiny fragments of red. "They're asking for our status report." "Tell them the truth," Zexthara said. She finally turned away from the viewport and walked to her command chair, her movements graceful despite the ship's wounded condition. "Tell them we failed. Tell them the Devourers are 3 times stronger than our intelligence suggested. Tell them that conventional weapons are useless against their adaptive bio-armor." She sat down and activated her personal communication array. The holographic display showed her reflection, and she was surprised by how old she looked. The stress of the last few months had aged her beyond her 150 years, adding lines to her face and dimming the natural luminescence of her crystalline skin. When this war began, she had been confident in the superiority of civilized warfare, the careful tactics and precise strategies that had kept peace in their sector for generations. Now she knew better. "Tell them something else," she said quietly. "Tell them we need help from someone who knows how to fight a war." The bridge fell silent except for the sound of damaged systems cycling through their repair routines. Everyone knew what she meant, though none of them wanted to say it out loud. In 50 years of galactic exploration and diplomatic contact, the Council had encountered many species. Most were peaceful, interested in trade and cultural exchange. Some were aggressive but could be reasoned with through careful negotiation. A few were, too, alien to understand but left other species alone. And then there were the humans. The reports from the first contact team were classified at the highest levels, but rumors spread through the diplomatic corps like radiation through a damaged hull. Earth was a Category 5 death world, a planet so hostile that most species would die within hours of landing on its surface. The gravity was crushing, the weather patterns were violent beyond belief, and the native life forms seemed designed specifically to kill each other in the most efficient ways possible. The fact that any intelligent species had evolved there was considered a statistical impossibility. The fact that humans had not only survived but thrived was considered terrifying. "Captain," Dr. Clichter said carefully. Are you certain about this course of action? The humans have been quarantined for good reason. Our xenopsychology report suggests they may be too dangerous for normal diplomatic contact. Zexthara pulled up the classified files on her personal display. She had read them dozens of times in the past few days, each reading making her more certain of what needed to be done. The humans fought wars that lasted for years, sometimes decades. They had developed weapons capable of destroying their own planet multiple times over. Their history was an endless cycle of conflict, competition, and violence that had forged them into something the galaxy had never seen before. They were predators who had learned to think. Look at these tactical analyses, she said, sharing the data with her senior staff. In their most recent global conflict, humans deployed chemical weapons, biological agents, and nuclear devices. They fought in environments that would kill most galactic species instantly: Arctic wastelands, burning deserts, the depths of their poisonous oceans. They turned their entire industrial capacity toward war production and kept fighting even when their cities were being bombed into rubble. She highlighted specific sections of the report. They practice something they call total war, the complete mobilization of civilian populations for military purposes. Their soldiers are trained to fight in any environment, against any enemy, using any weapon available. Most disturbing of all, they seem to consider this behavior normal. The bridge crew exchanged worried glances. The idea of an entire species dedicated to warfare went against everything civilized races believed about intelligent life. Violence was supposed to be a last resort, something that happened when diplomacy failed. The thought of beings who actively prepared for war, who studied it and refined it and passed that knowledge down through generations, violated their most basic assumptions about how rational creatures should behave. Ma'am, Kexman said hesitantly, what if they refuse to help? What if they decide we're too weak to be worth saving? Zexthara considered this possibility. The human psychological profile suggested they were tribal creatures, fiercely loyal to their own kind but potentially hostile to outsiders. They might see the Galactic Council as competitors or threats. They might demand territorial concessions, or technological transfers that would fundamentally alter the balance of power in their region of space, or they might surprise everyone. There's something else in these reports, she said, calling up another section of the classified files. Despite their capacity for violence, humans also show remarkable compassion for those they consider allies or innocents. They have a concept called protecting the weak that seems to override their normal competitive instincts. Several of their historical conflicts were fought specifically to defend smaller nations or oppressed populations. She stood up and walked back to the viewport, looking out at the debris field that had once been proud ships carrying delegates from across the galaxy. If we present our case correctly, if we can make them understand that we're not a threat but victims in need of protection, they might help us. And if they don't? Dr. Clichter asked. Zexthara didn't answer immediately. The Devourers had consumed 12 worlds in 3 months, turning billions of sentient beings into raw material for their ever-expanding hive mind. Their next target was Altair Prime, home to 6 billion Altarians who had never known war or violence or the fear that came from being hunted by something stronger than themselves. The planet's defenses were designed to repel asteroids and regulate space traffic, not fight off a species that turned entire solar systems into feeding grounds. Then we die, she said simply, but at least we'll die knowing we tried everything. She returned to her command chair and activated the long-range communication array. The transmission would take several hours to reach the Sol system, and several more for any response to return. By then, the Devourers might have already begun their assault on the next target system, but it was the only option left. Prepare. A message for Earth, she ordered. Full diplomatic protocols, maximum priority. Tell them who we are, what we're facing, and what we're offering in exchange for military assistance. She paused, thinking about how to phrase humanity's first official contact with galactic civilization. How do you ask a species of predators to save you from something even worse? How do you convince beings who have spent their entire evolutionary history fighting to trust strangers from the stars? Tell them, she said finally, that we need someone who knows how to win. Commander Jake Morrison stared at the translation matrix scrolling across his monitor and felt something cold settle in his stomach. The message had arrived 3 hours ago at Luna Base, transmitted on frequencies that shouldn't exist and using mathematical principles that made his head hurt just thinking about them. The computer had needed 2 hours just to figure out it was a language, another hour to begin making sense of the words. Now he understood why the automated systems had flagged it as Priority Alpha and woken him from his first good sleep in a week. "Sir, Admiral Hayes is on Secure Channel 1. Reported Sergeant Amy Rodriguez from her station across the communications center. She wants to know if this is some kind of joke." Morrison rubbed his eyes and looked at the message again. Alien civilizations, galactic councils, planet-eating monsters that consumed entire star systems. 3 months ago, he had been worried about resource disputes in the asteroid belt and keeping the peace between competing mining corporations. Now he was reading about wars between species that traveled faster than light and weapons that could destroy worlds. "Tell the Admiral it's not a joke," he said. "At least I don't think it is. The signal came from outside our solar system. The technology is beyond anything we've developed, and the translation protocols are too complex for anyone to fake." He paused, thinking about the implications. Besides, who would make up a story about aliens asking humans for military help? If someone wanted to create a hoax, they'd probably have the aliens wanting to share technology or invite us to join some peaceful federation. Rodriguez nodded and opened the channel to Terra Command. Morrison returned to studying the message, paying particular attention to the sections about human psychology and military capabilities. The aliens had been watching Earth for 50 years, learning about human history and culture through intercepted communications. They knew about the world wars, the nuclear weapons, the endless cycle of conflict that had shaped human civilization. What disturbed him was how accurately they had analyzed human nature. The message described humans as persistence hunters, predators, who had evolved to chase prey across vast distances until their targets collapsed from exhaustion. It mentioned humanity's pack-bonding behaviors, the way humans would fight to the death to protect members of their group. Most unsettling of all, it referenced human technological development, noting how quickly humans had progressed from basic tools to weapons of mass destruction. "They're afraid of us," Morrison said quietly. "Sir," Rodriguez asked, "the aliens. They're terrified of what we might do, but they're more afraid of what will happen if they don't ask for help." He highlighted a section of the message. "Look at this psychological profile. They think we're dangerous, unpredictable, possibly hostile. But they're still reaching out because they're desperate enough to risk making contact with a species they consider barely civilized." The secure channel chimed, and Admiral Lisa Hayes appeared on the main display. She looked tired, her gray hair pulled back in a regulation bun, and her uniform showing the wrinkles that came from too many long days in command. Behind her, Morrison could see the controlled chaos of Terra Command's Strategic Operations Center. "Jake, please tell me you have more information than what's in this initial report," she said without preamble. "Because right now it looks like aliens are asking humanity to fight their war for them, and I need to know if this is legitimate before I brief the Security Council." Morrison transferred the complete message files to Terra Command's servers. "It's real, Admiral. Our deep space monitoring stations confirm the transmission origin point, and the technology involved is centuries ahead of anything we've developed. The linguistic analysis alone proves this came from a non-human intelligence." He pulled up the tactical assessments included with the alien message. According to their data, these devourers have consumed 12 star systems in 3 months. They're not just conquering planets, they're literally eating them, converting all organic matter into more of themselves. The Alien Alliance tried to fight them using conventional methods and got completely destroyed. Hayes studied the information with the practiced eye of someone who had spent 30 years analyzing military threats. "What are they offering in exchange for our help?" "Advanced technology, detailed star charts, formal recognition in their Galactic Council, and access to their trade networks. Morrison highlighted the relevant sections. But Admiral, I think there's something more important. Here, look at how they describe their own military capabilities. The alien message included detailed specifications for their weapons and defensive systems. Energy-based weapons that could precisely target individual molecules, shields that could deflect the radiation from stellar explosions, propulsion systems that could cross galactic distances in weeks rather than centuries. By any measure, their technology was superior to humanity's crude fusion reactors and kinetic weapons. They have all this advanced equipment, but they fight like it's a game, Morrison continued. Precise strikes against military targets, carefully calculated force applications, rules of engagement designed to minimize casualties. They're trying to fight a total war using limited war tactics. Hayes nodded slowly. And the Devourers don't care about rules. Exactly. The aliens are holding back because they're civilized, because they believe in proportional responses and protecting civilian populations. Meanwhile, their enemy is using every biological weapon imaginable and treating entire planets as disposable resources. Morrison felt a grim smile cross his face. They need someone who understands that sometimes you have to be monsters to fight monsters. The implications were staggering. Humanity would be making first contact not as explorers or diplomats, but as military specialists hired to solve a problem that advanced galactic civilizations couldn't handle themselves. It said something about human nature that their first contribution to interstellar society would be expertise in warfare. What's your recommendation, Commander? Hayes asked. Morrison had been thinking about that question since the message first arrived. The smart move would be to proceed carefully, establish diplomatic channels, spend months or years learning about galactic politics before committing to any military action. The safe approach would be to offer limited assistance in exchange for technology transfers and cultural exchanges, but the message included time estimates. The Devourers were already moving toward the next target system, and the alien defenses wouldn't hold for more than a few weeks. By the time humanity finished proper diplomatic procedures, billions of sentient beings would be dead. I recommend we respond immediately and offer full military assistance, he said, but we do it on our terms, using our methods. No restrictions on weapons deployment, no rules of engagement beyond protecting friendly forces, and complete tactical autonomy for human commanders. Hayes raised an eyebrow. You want to give humanity carte blanche to wage unrestricted warfare against an unknown enemy using weapons and tactics that will probably horrify our new alien friends. Admiral, they came to us because they need predators. They need someone who can think like their enemy, who can be just as ruthless and adaptive as these Devourers. Morrison pulled up historical examples from human military conflicts. Every time humanity has faced an existential threat, we've escalated beyond what anyone thought possible. We've developed new weapons, new tactics, new ways of thinking about warfare that our enemies couldn't match. He highlighted specific cases: the rapid technological development during both world wars, the strategic innovations that had ended regional conflicts through overwhelming force, the way human military doctrine had evolved to address asymmetric threats. The aliens have been fighting this war like gentlemen, Morrison continued. They're losing because they can't conceive of the level of violence necessary to stop an enemy that treats everything as food. We can. Hayes was quiet for several minutes, studying the data and considering the implications. Finally, she nodded. I'll present your recommendation to the Security Council, but I think they'll approve it. The potential benefits are too great to ignore, and the moral imperative is clear. She paused. Jake, if we do this, if we commit to helping these aliens, it changes everything. Humanity stops being an isolated species and becomes part of something larger. Morrison thought about that. For 50 years, humanity had assumed they were alone in the universe, that Earth was a unique accident in an otherwise empty cosmos. Now they were learning that space was full of intelligent life, ancient civilizations and conflicts that spanned entire galactic regions. Humanity was about to take its first steps onto a stage they never knew existed. Admiral, I think we stopped. Being isolated the moment these aliens decided we were worth talking to, he said. The question now is whether we're going to be just another member species or something special. Hayes smiled grimly. Given human history, I think we both know the answer to that question. The transmission ended, leaving Morrison alone with his thoughts and the translated alien message. In a few hours, the Security Council would make their decision, and humanity would either remain safely hidden in their corner of the galaxy or announce their presence to the universe in the most dramatic way possible. The first meeting between humans and aliens took place in the cargo bay of the UES Defiance, hastily converted into something that might pass for a diplomatic facility. Captain Ryan Blake had ordered his crew to remove the weapon storage racks and ammunition containers, replacing them with tables and chairs that looked crude compared to the flowing designs the aliens preferred. The air recyclers worked overtime to maintain atmospheric conditions suitable for 3 different species. Creating a mix that smelled faintly of ozone and recycled metal, Blake stood near the main airlock, watching his sensors track the approach of the alien shuttle. The Altarian vessel moved with impossible grace, its crystalline hull reflecting the harsh lights of the human ship's docking bay. No visible engines, no obvious weapon systems, just smooth curves that seemed designed more for beauty than function. It was everything human ships were not. "Captain, they're requesting permission to board," reported Lieutenant Amy Rodriguez from her position at the tactical station. She had been studying the alien language files for the past 6 hours, trying to understand communication protocols that assumed all intelligent species shared common cultural references. "Grant permission," Blake ordered. "And Rodriguez, keep those translation programs running. I don't want any misunderstandings during our first face-to-face contact." The airlock cycled through its sequence, equalizing pressure and atmosphere composition before the heavy doors slid open. What emerged made Blake understand why humanity had been classified as a Category 5 Deathworld species. Captain Zexthara entered first, her movements flowing like water despite the heavy gravity that human ships maintained. She was tall and elegant, with translucent skin that showed the flow of bioluminescent fluids beneath the surface. Her features were sharp and delicate, designed by evolution for a world where violence was rare and cooperation was necessary for survival. Behind her came Dr. Clichter, a being that resembled a cross between a praying mantis and a scholar. His compound eyes reflected the cargo bay lights in tiny fragments, while his 4 arms manipulated a translation device that looked more like art than technology. Everything about him suggested intelligence and careful thought. A creature that had evolved to solve problems through analysis rather than action. The third member of the delegation was Commander Velshan, a feline species with golden fur and large eyes that seemed designed to see in low light conditions. He moved with predator grace, but Blake could tell it was the kind of hunting behavior designed for catching small prey. Not fighting wars, all 3 aliens stopped just inside the airlock, their eyes widening as they took in their first close look at humans. Blake had tried to make his people look as non-threatening as possible. He wore his dress uniform instead of combat armor, kept his sidearm holstered, and had ordered his crew to maintain relaxed postures. It didn't seem to help. The aliens were staring at him and his officers like they had just encountered something from their worst nightmares. "Welcome aboard the Defiance," Blake said, his words automatically converted by the translation system into the musical tones of Altarian speech. "I'm Captain Blake, commanding officer of this vessel." Zexthara stepped forward, but Blake noticed she kept her distance, staying well beyond what humans would consider normal conversation range. "Captain Blake, I am Zexthara of the Altarian Fleet. Thank you for responding to our request for assistance." Her voice was beautiful, like wind chimes in a gentle breeze, but Blake could hear the tension underneath. She was afraid, though trying hard not to show it. "Before we discuss military cooperation," Dr. Clichter interjected, his translator giving his words a buzzing quality that reminded Blake of insects, "we must address the obvious concerns about human psychology and methods of warfare." Blake exchanged glances with Rodriguez and Commander Jake Morrison, who had arrived from Luna Base aboard one of the escort vessels. They had expected this conversation, but it was still uncomfortable to be treated like dangerous animals during what was supposed to be humanity's first diplomatic contact. "What concerns?" Blake asked. Dr. Clichter activated a holographic display that showed detailed files on human history. Images flashed past showing ancient battles, medieval sieges, industrial wars, and nuclear explosions. The alien had clearly spent considerable time studying humanity's violent past. "Your species has been engaged in continuous warfare for your entire recorded history," Clichter said. "You have developed weapons capable of destroying your own planet multiple times over. Most disturbing, you consider this behavior normal and necessary for social development?" Blake felt a flash of irritation. These beings had asked for humanity's help specifically because they needed someone who knew how to fight, and now they were criticizing humans for being good at it. "Doctor, with respect, you came to us because your peaceful methods weren't working against the Devourers," he said. "Did you expect to find warriors who had never fought wars?" Commander Velshon spoke for the first time, his voice carrying the subtle growl of a predator species. "Captain Blake, we understand the necessity of violence in certain circumstances. What concerns us is the scale and intensity of human warfare. Your conflicts involve entire populations, your weapons target civilian infrastructure, and your soldiers are trained to fight in conditions that would kill most galactic species." Rodriguez pulled up human military training records on her display. "Commander, humans evolved on a world where everything was trying to kill us. Our gravity is twice what most species can handle. Our weather patterns include storms that can level cities, and our native life forms include creatures that hunt in packs and can track prey for hundreds of kilometers." She highlighted specific examples from Earth's ecosystem. "We have predators that can run for hours without tiring, venomous creatures that can kill with a single bite, and parasites that can control the behavior of their hosts. Humans didn't become violent because we chose to, we became violent because anything else meant extinction." The aliens absorbed this information with visible discomfort. Zexthara's bioluminescent patterns shifted to colors that Blake's cultural briefings suggested indicated distress. "Captain," she said carefully, "we need to understand what methods you intend to use against the Devourers. Our military protocols require precise application of force, minimal casualties, and protection of civilian populations. Can humans operate within these constraints?" Blake considered his answer carefully. The honest response was that human military doctrine included tactics that would horrify civilized species, strategies that accepted massive casualties in exchange for strategic advantages, and weapons that made no distinction between military and civilian targets when survival was at stake. "Captain Zexthara, humans have rules of engagement and laws governing warfare," he said finally. "But those rules exist for conflicts between human nations, where both sides share common values about what constitutes acceptable behavior. The Devourers aren't human. They don't follow rules, don't protect civilians, and don't negotiate." He activated his own display, showing tactical analyses of the Devourer attacks that had been included in the alien message. "Your enemy treats entire planets as food sources. They consume everything organic, including the civilian populations you're trying to protect. Against an opponent like that, traditional rules of engagement become irrelevant." Morrison stepped forward. "The question isn't whether we can operate within your constraints. It's whether your constraints are effective against this enemy. Based on your own battle reports, the answer is no." The cargo bay fell silent except for the hum of life support systems and the distant vibration of the ship's engines. The aliens were clearly struggling with the implications of what they were hearing. They needed help from beings they considered barely civilized, using methods that violated everything they believed about proper conduct in warfare. Dr. Clichter was the first to break the silence. "What do you propose?" Blake had been thinking about this question since first reading the alien message. The smart approach would be to offer limited assistance, to work within alien constraints while gradually introducing more aggressive tactics. But the time pressure made that impossible. We propose to treat this as what it actually is, a war of extinction against an enemy that shows no mercy and follows no rules, he said. Human forces will use whatever weapons and tactics are necessary to destroy the Devourer threat completely. We'll do our best to protect civilian populations, but we won't handicap ourselves with restrictions that give the enemy an advantage. Commander Velshin's tail lashed in what Blake suspected was agitation. Captain, you're asking us to authorize unlimited warfare using weapons and methods we don't understand against an enemy that may adapt to whatever you deploy. The risks are enormous. The risks of doing nothing are higher, Rodriguez pointed out. According to your own projections, the Devourers will reach your core worlds within 2 weeks. Every day you spend debating constraints is another day they use to grow stronger. Zexthara looked at her fellow delegates, having what appeared to be a silent conversation through subtle changes in her bioluminescent patterns. Finally, she turned back to the humans. The news traveled through Galactic Council space faster than light itself, carried by quantum communication networks that span thousands of worlds. Humanity had destroyed an entire Devourer swarm in 4 hours. The impossible had happened, and every species in the galaxy wanted to know how Admiral Lisa Hayes stood in the command center of the supercarrier Hughes Wolverine, watching star charts that showed Devourer fleet movements across a dozen systems. The enemy was retreating from several fronts, apparently unwilling to face human forces directly. But long-range sensors revealed a disturbing truth. They weren't fleeing randomly. The bioships were converging, massing their full strength for what intelligence analysts believed would be a final assault on the Council's core worlds. Admiral, we're receiving reports from across the sector, said Captain Ryan Blake, his voice carrying over the secure communication link from the Defiance. Devourer forces have abandoned their attacks on 3 different systems. They're all heading toward the same destination. Hayes nodded grimly. She had expected this response. Humanity's victory at Bright Garden had proven that the Devourers weren't invincible, but it had also taught them that conventional tactics wouldn't work against human forces. The hive mind was adapting, changing its strategy to something more dangerous than random expansion. Colonel Parker, what's your assessment? She asked. Colonel Sam Parker looked up from his tactical display, where he had been studying orbital bombardment patterns. His specialty was reducing fortified positions to rubble from space, a skill that had proven disturbingly useful during the resource wars. They're massing for a decisive battle, Admiral. Intelligence suggests over 10,000 bioships converging. On Altair Prime, that's more firepower than we faced at Bright Garden by a factor of 20. The implications were staggering. Hayes had brought a full battle group, including her flagship and its escort fleet. But even with humanity's superior weapons and tactics, they would be facing overwhelming odds. More concerning was the enemy's apparent learning curve. The Devourers had studied human combat methods during their retreat and would likely deploy countermeasures. Dr. Turner, are your special projects ready for deployment? She asked. Dr. Alex Turner looked uncomfortable at the question. His weapons research division had spent the past week developing systems specifically designed to counter Devourer biology. Most civilized species would classify his creations as war crimes, violations of every treaty governing acceptable military conduct. But these weren't civilized times. The nanite systems are ready, Admiral, though I have concerns about their long-term effects. We're essentially deploying a technological plague that will consume any organic matter with Devourer genetic markers. Once released, we won't be able to control where it spreads. Hayes understood the implications. Turner's nanites would hunt down and destroy every trace of Devourer biology in a star system. But they might also affect other organic life forms if the targeting parameters weren't perfect. It was the kind of weapon that could solve their immediate problem while creating new ones for the future. What about the other systems? She asked. Gravity bombs are tested and ready. We can create localized space-time distortions that will crush anything within their effective radius. The quantum torpedoes have been modified to phase through biological armor before detonating, and the antimatter warheads are loaded and armed. Hayes nodded. These were humanity's most dangerous weapons. Systems developed during the darkest periods of Earth's history when survival required crossing every moral line imaginable. They had hoped never to use them again, but the universe had other plans. "Admiral," came a new voice over the communication system. Captain Zexthara had been monitoring human fleet movements from her damaged vessel, coordinating with Council forces still capable of fighting. "We've received authorization from the Galactic Council for unrestricted military action. Whatever methods you deem necessary are approved." The statement hung in the air like a death sentence. The most peaceful civilizations in the galaxy were giving humanity permission to wage unlimited warfare, using any weapon or tactic deemed effective. It was a level of trust that Hayes found both humbling and terrifying. "Captain Zexthara, I need you to understand what you're authorizing," she said carefully. "Human military doctrine includes weapons that can sterilize entire planets, tactics that treat civilian casualties as acceptable losses, and strategies that prioritize victory over every other consideration. If we fight this war, the way humans fight wars, the galaxy will never look at us the same way." There was a long pause before Zexthara responded. "Admiral, we've studied your species for 50 years. We know what you're capable of. We also know that 6 billion innocent beings are about to die unless someone stops the Devourers. If that requires unleashing humanity's full military potential, then that's what we're asking you to do." Hayes felt the weight of command settle on her shoulders like a physical burden. She was about to authorize the use of weapons that could reshape the political balance of the galaxy, tactics that would reveal humanity's true capabilities to species that were already afraid of them. But the alternative was watching billions of sentient beings get consumed by creatures that treated intelligence as just another form of food. "All units, this is Admiral Hayes," she broadcast on the fleet-wide channel. "We are implementing Protocol 7. All weapon systems are authorized, all tactical restrictions are lifted, and all crews are cleared for maximum effort operations. The objective is simple: complete destruction of enemy forces with no survivors." Across the human fleet, soldiers and spacers who had trained for this moment their entire careers began final preparations. In the marine bays of the assault transports, Major Tony Lewis briefed his teams on boarding actions against bioships the size of small cities. His forces included specialists who had fought in environments that would kill most galactic species. Instantly, warriors who treated impossible odds as merely another day at the office. "Listen up," Lewis told his assembled Marines. "The enemy we're facing isn't like anything in the history books. They're not soldiers or pilots or even individuals. As we understand the term, they're parts of a collective organism that sees everything else in the universe as potential food. They don't surrender, they don't retreat, and they don't negotiate." He activated a holographic display showing Devourer bioships and their internal structures. "Our job is to board these vessels and destroy them from the inside. We'll be fighting in zero-gravity, toxic atmospheres and spaces designed by something that thinks completely differently than we do. The creatures we encounter will be trying to capture us alive so they can absorb our biological material and add our knowledge to their collective." The Marines listened with the calm attention of professionals who had volunteered for the most dangerous job in human space. They wore powered armor that could function in any environment, carried weapons that could punch through starship hulls, and had undergone training that pushed human endurance to its absolute limits. "Sergeant Watson, your team will handle the primary assault corridors. Corporal Young, you'll take point on the engineering sections. Everyone else follows standard boarding protocols with one exception. If you're about to be captured, activate your suit's self-destruct. We don't give these things any information they can use against us." Similar briefings were taking place throughout the fleet. On the Wolverine, fighter pilots prepared for battles in three-dimensional space where the enemy could attack from any direction. In the engineering sections, technicians made final adjustments to weapons that pushed the boundaries of known physics. In the medical bays, doctors prepared treatments for injuries that no human had ever suffered before. Hayes returned to her command chair. and activated the fleet's tactical coordination systems. Every ship, every weapon, every soldier was now part of a single organism dedicated to warfare. It was humanity at its most dangerous, a species that had learned to fight as a unified force while maintaining the individual initiative that made each human unpredictable. "All units report ready, Admiral," came the report from her tactical officer. Hayes looked at the star charts one more time. The Devourer fleet was still 12 hours away from Altair Prime, giving her forces time to position themselves for the coming battle. But she knew this would be different from their previous encounter. The enemy would be expecting them now, prepared for human tactics and armed with countermeasures developed specifically to neutralize their advantages. "Signal the fleet," she ordered. "We're going to show the galaxy what happens when you threaten." A Deathworlders, friends, the die was cast. Humanity was about to reveal its true nature to the universe, and nothing would ever be the same again. The Altair system had never seen war before. For 3,000 years, the twin suns had watched over peaceful worlds where art and philosophy flourished under crystalline spires that reached toward the stars. Now those same suns illuminated something darker, a swarm of bioships that blotted out entire sectors of space as they advanced like a living storm toward the inhabited planets. Admiral Hayes stood on the bridge of the Wolverine and watched the enemy approach through her tactical displays. 10,000 Devourer vessels moved in patterns that hurt to look at, their hulls pulsing with absorbed energy from consumed worlds. Some were the size of asteroids, others rivaled small moons, and all of them hungered for the 6 billion lives hiding in underground shelters on Altair Prime. "They're bigger than our intelligence suggested," reported Captain Blake from the Defiance. "Some of those bioships are showing mass readings comparable to our heaviest battleships." Hayes nodded. The Devourers had learned from their previous encounters, growing larger vessels and developing new strategies specifically designed to counter human tactics. Intelligence reports suggested they had absorbed the knowledge of every species they had consumed, creating a collective memory that spanned dozens of different military traditions. "Colonel Parker, begin preliminary bombardment. Target the smaller vessels first and work your way up." Parker's orbital bombardment divisions opened fire from maximum range. Kinetic kill vehicles accelerated to significant fractions of light. Speed struck the outer edges of the Devourer formation. Nuclear warheads detonated in carefully planned sequences, creating overlapping kill zones that should have vaporized entire squadrons of enemy ships. Instead, the biovessels simply absorbed the energy and kept coming. "Admiral, they're adapting faster than we anticipated," reported Dr. Turner from his weapons control station. "Their bio-armor is evolving in real time, developing resistance to our weapon systems within minutes of first contact." Hayes had expected this. The Devourers were no longer the mindless swarm that humanity had faced at Bright Garden. They had studied human combat methods and developed countermeasures that neutralized conventional weapons. But humanity had been preparing for this possibility. "All units, implement strategy Omega, let them surround us." The order went against every military instinct that human commanders had developed over centuries of warfare. Instead of maintaining defensive positions or attempting to outflank the enemy, the human fleet moved directly into the center of the Devourer formation. To any observer, it looked like suicide. The bioships responded exactly as Hayes had hoped. They closed around the human vessels like a living trap, their hulls pulsing with anticipation as they prepared to consume humanity's finest warships. The distance between opposing forces dropped to point-blank range, so close that the organic vessels began extending feeding tentacles toward their prey. "Dr. Turner, deploy the nanites." Turner's hands hesitated over his control panel for just a moment. Once released, his self-replicating combat nanites would spread through the Devourer swarm like a technological plague, consuming enemy biomass and converting it into more nanites. The system was designed to be absolutely lethal to devour biology while leaving other organic life untouched, but the margin for error was terrifyingly small. "Nanites away," he reported. Across the battlefield, cargo pods ejected from human vessels and detonated among the bioships? To the naked eye, nothing seemed to happen. The microscopic machines were invisible as they began their work, infiltrating devourer hulls and spreading through the organic matrix that held the enemy. Fleet together, the first signs appeared within minutes. Small sections of bioship hulls began to dissolve, their living armor breaking down as the nanites converted organic matter into more copies of themselves. The effect spread like fire through the enemy formation, jumping from vessel to vessel, through the feeding tentacles that connected different parts of the swarm, but the devourers adapted again. The bioships began severing their connections to infected vessels, cutting away diseased sections of their own hulls, even destroying smaller ships that had been completely compromised. The hive mind was sacrificing parts of itself to protect the whole, accepting massive casualties to prevent total annihilation. "They're learning too fast," Hayes muttered. "Colonel Parker, deploy the gravity bombs." Parker's bombardment ships launched a new type of weapon, devices that manipulated space-time itself to create localized areas of crushing gravitational force. Where the gravity bombs detonated, bioships simply ceased to exist. Their matter compressed into points of incredible density before evaporating in bursts of exotic radiation. The devourers responded by spreading their formation wider, reducing the effectiveness of area effect weapons. They began launching boarding pods toward human vessels, trying to capture enemy ships intact so they could study human technology and develop better countermeasures. "Major Lewis, you're cleared for boarding operations." Lewis and his marine assault teams had been waiting for this moment. Their dropships launched from the human fleet and dove straight into the heart of the enemy formation. Instead of trying to avoid the devourer vessels, they deliberately crashed through bioship hulls and began fighting their way through organic corridors that pulsed with alien life. The battles inside the bioships were like nothing in human military history. Lewis found himself fighting creatures that had been grown specifically for combat, organisms that could reshape themselves in real time to counter whatever weapons his marines deployed. The air was toxic, the gravity shifted without warning, and the walls themselves tried to digest anything that touched them. "This is Lewis to all units," he reported over the tactical channel. "These ships are more than vessels, they're living ecosystems. Every surface is hostile, every breath is poison, and the enemy can modify the environment faster than we can adapt to it." His Marines fought with the ruthless efficiency that had made humanity feared throughout their own solar system. They used plasma weapons that burned through organic armor, explosive charges that could breach any hull, and combat drugs that let them function in environments that would kill unprotected humans within seconds. But for every bioship they destroyed from within, 2 more seemed to take its place. The Devourer fleet was simply too large, too adaptable, too willing to accept casualties in exchange for strategic advantage. "Admiral," reported her tactical officer, "we're facing total force commitment from the enemy. They're bringing everything they have to this battle." Hayes realized that conventional tactics, even enhanced with humanity's most advanced weapons, weren't going to be enough. The Devourers had learned too much, adapted too quickly, and committed too many resources for anything less than humanity's ultimate weapons to make a difference. "All units, prepare for stellar collapse bombardment. Dr. Turner, initiate the Star Killer." Protocols. The weapons that humanity deployed next violated every treaty that civilized species had ever written about acceptable military conduct. Starkiller devices manipulated stellar fusion reactions, causing targeted suns to undergo controlled collapse events that released more energy in seconds than most civilizations used in centuries. The twin suns of Altair flickered as humanity's weapons took effect. Stellar matter compressed beyond normal density limits before exploding outward in waves of annihilation that swept through the entire system. The Devourer bioships, caught in the expanding wavefront, simply ceased to exist as their organic hulls were converted to pure energy. When the stellar fires finally died down, nothing remained of the greatest Devourer fleet ever assembled. 10,000 bioships, representing millions of years of evolutionary development and the accumulated knowledge of dozens of consumed species, had been reduced to expanding clouds of ionized gas, but humanity wasn't finished. Signal all units. Hayes broadcast. Begin pursuit operations. I want every Devourer vessel in this sector of space hunted down and destroyed. No survivors, no escape routes, no mercy. The human fleet spread out across multiple star systems, using advanced sensors to track fleeing bioships to their hiding places. Colonel Parker's bombardment divisions used stellar engineering techniques to collapse entire solar systems where Devourer remnants tried to establish new bases. Dr. Turner's nanites were released into space itself, creating dead zones where no Devourer biology could survive. The pursuit lasted for weeks. But eventually the last bioship was tracked to its hiding place in a dead system at the galaxy's edge. Major Lewis personally led the boarding action that confirmed what human intelligence already suspected. The Devourers were extinct. Their hive mind permanently severed and their collective memory lost forever. Captain Dexthara met with Admiral Hayes aboard the Wolverine after the final battle reports were filed. The Altarian looked older, her crystalline features dulled by the stress of watching her species' salvation purchased with weapons that could unmake stars. The Galactic Council has asked me to extend their formal gratitude, she said quietly. You saved not just our worlds, but the concept of civilization itself. Without human intervention, the Devourers would have consumed everything. Hayes nodded, but her expression remained troubled.